Today, we're taking a long, hard look at one of the most agonizing moral dilemmas in history, and we're filtering it through the eyes of a philosopher who was both an icon of integrity and, well, a politician just drenched in corruption.
We are diving deep into the life and works of Lucius Annaeus Seneca. Born around 4 BCE, he was a champion of Stoicism, a brilliant tragedian, and yet he spent the most crucial years of his life as the chief advisor to the let's just say it, the sociopathic young Emperor Nero.
So our mission is to unpack that central tension of his career. How could Seneca, a man who preached virtue, detachment, and integrity, survive and even thrive inside the most ruthless and decadent regime in the Roman world? We're using a whole stack of sources, biographical sketches, political histories from Tacitus, and of course his own foundational works like On Mercy and the Moral Letters to Lucilius. We're going to synthesize how he tried to reconcile the ideal life with the political reality of absolute power.
And Seneca's life is just this extraordinary example of compromise. And the hook is, it's devastatingly fascinating. I mean, this great philosopher who wrote volumes on living well was forced to compose the official speech that justified Nero's murder of his own mother, Agrippina, to the Senate.
Wow.
So the question isn't just if he rationalized it, but how. How he built this whole theoretical framework to defend his impossible position.
So let's get into this. For you, the listener, the key takeaway is seeing Seneca's search for an applied morality and ethical roadmap for survival when you're surrounded by tyrants. We begin with Act 1, Early Life and Political Lightning Rod. Seneca was born far from Rome, in Corduba, Spain, into the relatively privileged provincial equestrian class.
Yeah, and it's really important to note the contrast in his early influences. His father was a noted rhetorician, but he was decidedly old-school Roman, a practical man focused on state service, political success.
Right. Philosophy was just a distraction for him.
A charming but ultimately useless distraction, exactly. He pushed Seneca relentlessly toward the Senate.
But Seneca, in his youth, he sort of resisted that path. He was drawn into this circle of very serious Stoics, studying under teachers like Sextius. These were the kind of philosophers who thought Roman, but wrote Greek. And they believed that Jupiter can do no more than a man of virtue.
That is a powerful internal yardstick to carry into the rough and tumble of the Roman Senate. It is, but he did channel that fervor into state ambition, and he was successful. By 37 CE, he was a known orator and writer. He secured his seat under Emperor Caligula.
But the Senate under Caligula was not a place for brilliance. It was a place for obedience. And Seneca was evidently a little too brilliant. The sources tell us that one of his speeches sparked such deep, petty jealousy in Caligula that the emperor ordered his execution right on the spot.
It was a brutal introduction to the reality of power. His life was only saved because an imperial courtesan stepped in and claimed that Seneca's famously weak health meant he'd be dead within weeks anyway.
So his first taste of standing out was almost a death sentence. He survived Caligula, but the imperial court was this constantly revolving door of paranoia. In 41 CE, under the next emperor, Claudius, Seneca finally fell victim to some political maneuvering.
Right. Empress Messalina, who was consolidating her own power, accused him of adultery with Caligula's sister, Julia Livilla. There was likely very little truth to it, but the Senate, happy to see a talented upstart brought low, demanded his execution.
But Claudius intervened.
He did. He, perhaps just to mitigate the political risk, reduced the sentence to exile.
And he was banished to desolate Corsica. This forced removal from Rome, from the center of all his ambition, must have been devastating.
Initially, absolutely. You can see his immediate reaction in the consolation to Polybius, where he is just transparently pleading for a pardon, showering the emperor's powerful freedman with flattery.
He's just miserable.
Completely. He's focused solely on getting back to political life. But his confinement eventually triggered a radical philosophical transformation. Stuck on that tiny, desolate island, he threw himself into scientific study, astronomical observation, really anything to shift his perspective.
It changed his scale of thinking, didn't it?
Entirely. The Stoic idea of cosmopolis, this notion that every wise person is a citizen of the universal world state, it stopped being abstract theory for him. It became a lived psychological necessity.
He captures that shift so profoundly in the Consolation to Helvia, where he writes, "Though we travel to the ends of the earth, nowhere will we find a country foreign to us. For from everywhere we can raise our eyes to the sky."
It's beautiful. If Rome won't have him, the universe will. It was the ultimate mental escape from his physical chains.
And this leads him to write one of his powerful early works on the shortness of life during that final phase of his exile.
And the conclusion he reaches is absolute. State life is a frantic pursuit of anxiety. It prevents self-reflection. True good comes only through philosophy.
He was so committed to this idea that the sources suggest he fully intended, if he were pardoned, to just retire permanently to Athens, to dedicate himself solely to philosophy and abandon Rome entirely.
It was a pure, unblemished philosophical ideal. But the political machine, it has a way of sucking you back in.
Which brings us to Act 2, the compromise and imperial service. Seneca's pardon didn't come because Claudius had a change of heart. It came because of a cold political calculation by the new Empress Agrippina in 48 CE.
Agrippina was ruthless. She was securing the throne for her young son Nero, and she needed loyal, brilliant minds. She brought Seneca back, secured him a high post, and installed him as tutor to an 11-year-old Nero.
And Tacitus, our historian, he explains her reasoning pretty clearly. She figured Seneca would be entirely devoted to her because she saved him.
And hostile to Claudius because of the injustice of his exile. He wasn't a philosopher to her. He was a political instrument engineered for her benefit.
And Seneca accepted. He walked directly into the highest possible moral compromise. I mean, his own philosophy told him to flee from power, but his ambition, or maybe his sense of duty to reform the state from within, told him to stay.
He quickly partnered with Ephraenius Burrus, the Praetorian prefect, and together they essentially ran the empire during Nero's early, more stable years. But their survival strategy, as Tacitus details it, was incredibly cynical.
How so?
Well, they realized Nero was entering a dangerous age. He was young, hormonal, impulsive. So their strategy was to allow him some pleasures, indulgences of vice and luxury, provided he neglected virtue and stayed away from direct state governance.
A Faustian bargain. Keep the tyrant busy with debauchery and we can run the empire correctly.
Pretty much.
And we can't overlook the fact that for a few years, from 54 to 59 CE, this cynical trade-off actually led to positive results. That period often called the Quinquennium Neronis Nero's 5 good years.
Exactly. Seneca used his leverage to push through significant reforms. He revived a republican ideal by increasing the Senate's power, letting them debate real issues again. And crucially, he implemented financial measures to separate the state treasury from the emperor's private wallet, a huge step toward fiscal responsibility.
He also took aim at political corruption, prosecuting abusive provincial governors, and maybe most dangerously, trying to curb the power of the delators.
The hated political informers.
Right, who thrived on paranoia and accusations.
And it's so ironic that the very measure he championed fighting the informers caused the most complaints against him personally. His enemies just turned those same tactics right back on him. It just shows how quickly good intentions could poison you in Rome.
So how did he justify this tightrope walk? He formalized his philosophy of governance in On Mercy, which was addressed directly to Nero. This wasn't just philosophy, it was a political governance manual designed to check a tyrant's worst impulses using the language of virtue.
Right. He argued that a rational monarchy was the only functional system for Rome, but only if the ruler embodied the wise man who knows how to be king. And the key characteristic of this ideal monarch was rational mercy.
Rational mercy, what does that actually entail? Because that sounds like a very political concept, not a very stoic one.
It's a calculated balance. The ideal ruler is neither brutally strict nor naively soft. They exercise mercy, not out of weakness, but because it is a rational tool for maintaining order and, more importantly, securing the universal love and devotion of the people. It was Seneca trying to bind the tyrant to virtuous behavior through pure self-interest.
It was an attempt to provide a theoretical basis for managing a monster. But as we move into Act 3, moral erosion and new concepts, we see how quickly that theory collapsed under the weight of political reality. And it starts with the problem of his own wealth.
Oh yeah, Nero was notoriously generous, and Seneca accepted vast gifts, lands, houses, money accumulating an enormous personal fortune. He became one of the wealthiest men in the empire.
Which is just a loud, undeniable contradiction to the stoic detachment he's supposed to be preaching. This is where the critique of hypocrisy has to come in. I mean, how can the leading voice of Stoicism, which demands simplicity and freedom from material desire, rationalize accepting obscene wealth from the very source of moral decay?
Well, he was fully aware of the accusations. His response, his ultimate justification, was that wealth itself is morally neutral. It's how you use it that matters.
The classic defense.
Exactly. He argued that the wise man is merely testing his virtue. He can use the wealth appropriately or relinquish it immediately if it threatens his integrity. But his critics, they argued that in Nero's court, just accepting the wealth was the threat itself.
And then came the true point of no return. In 59 CE, the political theater turned into a horror show. Nero ordered the murder of his own mother, Agrippina.
The crime was shocking, even for Rome. And Seneca was placed in this moral vice. He was forced to not only sanction the matricide, but to write the official, detailed speech justifying it to the Senate, accusing Agrippina of treason and plotting against Nero.
That is just soul damaging. When the speech was read, Tacitus notes that the criticism shifted entirely. It was no longer aimed solely at Nero, but at Seneca, who clothed the confession of the crime in written speech. He now bore the moral stain of the emperor's actions.
This crisis of justification demanded a theoretical resolution, and Seneca provided it immediately in his work on the Blessed Life. He had to defend his position. If I am so compromised, how can I still be a philosopher?
And what was his defense?
He argued that we have to differentiate between the absolute moral ideal, the true wise man, and the philosopher who is merely seeking the ideal. Seneca admitted, "I am not the perfect wise man." He was immersed in the duties and obligations of life, just trying his best. The gap between the ideal and reality was just too large to bridge.
So if you can't be perfect, how do you even measure whether you're a moral person? You're serving a tyrant, you're rich, you've justified murder. What is left to hold on to?
This is where Seneca makes perhaps his greatest original contribution to Stoicism. He introduced the concept of conscience, or conscientia. While Stoics traditionally emphasized rational control, Seneca brought in an internal metric that was recognized rationally and felt emotionally.
An emotional feeling of moral awareness. That's revolutionary for Stoicism, which famously tried to eliminate passions.
It is. Conscience became the internal, feeling awareness of the moral norm. This consciousness is what distinguishes the moral person, the one who is trying, from the oblivious crowd. Even if the state is corrupt and his external actions are compromised, his internal feeling of moral awareness, his conscience, is what validates his philosophical path. It's the last refuge of integrity in a corrupt world.
That concept couldn't save his political position, though. And we move into Act 4, retirement and final wisdom. By 62 CE, his ally Burrus was dead, and Nero had fully devolved into tyranny.
Seneca's influence just vanished. He immediately requested retirement and even tried to return his vast fortune to Nero. Nero sarcastically refused, saying he wouldn't accept such a gift from his old friend.
So Seneca then made a very public and deliberate withdrawal. He avoided crowds, the public eye, citing ill health and a return to his philosophical studies. This forced retirement required him to redefine virtue one last time.
On the tranquility of mind, he addresses the necessity of finding usefulness when public service is blocked. He argues that while public life is the optimal stage for virtue, if you cannot serve the state, you must still perform the duties of a man.
And what does that mean in practice? If you can't run the empire, what duty is left?
It means refocusing on the immediate and private sphere, being a loyal friend, a temperate dinner guest, a dedicated writer. The duty shifts from serving the state to simply serving humanity within the confines available to you.
And he makes the most profound intellectual justification for this retirement in his later work, On Leisure. He formally separates allegiance into two categories, or two states.
Correct. The first state is the Roman civil community, which had proven itself to be the domain of tyrants and their slaves. Seneca concluded this state was beyond reform.
And the second state.
That is the greater state, the universal community of gods and men. Seneca argued that a person can serve this greater state, even in retirement, and perhaps even better, through philosophy and contemplation of the greatness of all existence. He essentially revoked his citizenship in Rome and declared himself a citizen of the world, dedicating his final years to instructing others in this universal community.
And to do that, he wrote his final philosophical summary, The Moral Letters to Lucilius, a series of letters intended to guide his friend Lucilius on the path to becoming a philosopher.
These letters are a brilliant final testament. They adopted the diatribe form, a popular moralistic genre that avoids dry logic. It's intimate, conversational, and constantly shifts topics, using relatable examples to drive points home.
Which directly reflects his teaching goal. Seneca believed that philosophical instruction had to be accessible, easy to memorize, and most crucially, it had to be striking the soul. The philosopher's main tool, he believed, was emotional impact, not dry academic precision.
His mandate to his students was clear. Torment them, press them, urge them, speak against greed, speak against luxury. This was practical wisdom designed to immediately change behavior and align the reader's conscience with the moral norm.
But his integrity, that internal commitment to philosophy, even in retirement, was ultimately a constant passive rebuke to Nero. A tyrant cannot tolerate virtue, even when it's silent. In 65 CE, Nero seized his opportunity when the Pisonian conspiracy was uncovered.
And despite the fact that Seneca's guilt was dubious at best, Nero ordered him to commit suicide. And Seneca adhered to his Stoic principles absolutely. He opened his veins alongside his wife.
It's a gruesome final chapter. The historical accounts tell us that because of his old age and his scanty diet, his blood flowed incredibly slowly. He had to cut veins on his shins and under his knees to hasten his death, turning his last moments into a final, deliberate philosophical performance.
And he dictated his final words to scribes, a last act of philosophical service to that universal state he now embraced. Seneca ultimately failed to reconcile the moral norm with service to the Roman state in practice, but he succeeded in establishing a clear theoretical escape route. He shifted allegiance entirely to the duties owed to that greater universal community of humankind, guided by that internal, emotionally felt metric of conscience.
Seneca's life demonstrates the brutal, often fatal cost of attempting to apply high philosophy in a low, corrupt world. He proved that compromise may be necessary for survival, but the philosopher's duty remains constant, to uphold the internal standard, even if the external world is completely rotten.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the learner. Seneca concluded that when political action is impossible, one must fulfill the duties of a man within the universal community. Considering his doctrine of the two states, what are the specific practical duties, beyond national borders or partisan politics, that a citizen of the world should prioritize serving today?
It's a question that forces us to look beyond immediate politics and focus on eternal human obligations, just as Seneca did in his final years. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary and compromised life of Seneca.
We hope this analysis helps you understand the weight of applying philosophy in the real world, armed with a little more context and hopefully a lot more conscience.
Join us and keep your curiosity well fed. Who knows? The next video might be exactly what you didn't know you needed.